Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku discovered the Speed Force before Barry Allen. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air on the rooftop was thin and cold, a stark contrast to the stifling humidity of the city streets below. It scraped at Izuku Midoriya's lungs, each breath a painful reminder of the words that had just hollowed him out, leaving a gaping, echoing void where a lifetime of dreams used to be. No, I don't think you can become a hero without a quirk, All Might's voice. Not the booming, confident baritone from the television, but a weary, defeated sigh. The voice of Toshinori Yagi, a man drowning in his own limitations, a man who had looked at Izuku's desperate, shining hope and extinguished it with the simple, brutal truth. Izuku's fingers, white-knuckled, were still clutching the scorched strap of his yellow backpack. His other hand held the notebook All Might had signed, the ink a cruel mockery of the connection he had craved. He had met his idol. He had asked the question that had defined his entire existence. And the answer had shattered him. He sank to his knees on the gritty rooftop, the rough concrete biting into his trousers. The setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the skyline of Muzurifu in hues of orange and violet, a beautiful, indifferent canvas for his despair. Every taunt from Bakugo, every pitying look from his teachers, every tearful apology from his mother, they had all been leading to this. The final, authoritative verdict from the highest court in the land. Guilty of being ordinary. Sentenced to a life in the background. A sob tore its way from his chest, a raw, ugly sound that was swallowed by the wind. He wasn't just sad. He was empty. For 14 years, the dream of being a hero was the sun his entire world orbited. It was the fuel for his frantic note-taking, the reason he studied pro-heroes with a scholar's dedication, the shield he held up against the constant barrage of reality. Without it, he was just a collection of useless facts, a vessel of unspent adoration with no purpose. He was just Deku. Useless. He thought back to when he was 4, in the doctor's office, the X-ray on the light box showing the extra joint in his pinky toe. A tiny, insignificant piece of anatomy that had acted as a biological guillotine, severing him from 80% of the human race. His mother had held him that night, her own tears soaking his hair as she repeated the words he hadn't wanted to hear. "I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry." He had wanted her to say something else. He had wanted her to look at him, a tiny, trembling child staring at a computer screen showing All Might saving hundreds, and say, "You can do it. You can be a hero too." She never did. And now, either had All Might. The walk home was a blur. Izuku moved on autopilot, his feet scuffing along the familiar pavement as his mind replayed the scene on the roof. He passed the convenience store, a cardboard cutout of All Might in the window giving a thumbs up, the signature catchphrase. "I am here!" printed in a starburst bubble. It felt like a personal insult. Izuku flinched away, turning down a different street, a longer route. He wasn't ready to go home. He wasn't ready to face his mother and lie, to pretend he'd had a normal day. How could he explain that the sun had fallen out of his sky? He found himself walking beneath an underpass, the shade a welcome relief from the dying sun's glare. His thoughts were a maelstrom of self-pity and logical deconstruction. "It's not bad to dream," he'd said, "but isn't it? Isn't it cruel to let someone dream of flying when you know their feet are bound to the earth?" He was being realistic. Pros risk their lives. It's a fact. I have no power to risk. I'd just be a liability. He was right. He was right. He was... Boom. The world shook. A concussive blast of air and sound erupted from the street ahead, rattling the concrete walls of the underpass. Izuku was thrown from his depressive fugue, stumbling forward as car alarms began to shriek in a chaotic chorus. Smoke, thick and black, billowed into the sky. People were screaming, running away from the source of the explosion. Izuku, however, did the opposite. His feet, which had been dragging him through a funeral procession for his dreams, now carried him forward with an urgency that was as ingrained as breathing. A villain attack. His analytical mind, his one true asset, kicked into high gear, overriding his misery. He rounded the corner and skidded to a halt. The scene was one of controlled chaos. A crowd of onlookers was being held back by police. Pro-heroes were already on the scene. Death Arms was there, his muscular arms braced against a collapsing storefront, trying to ensure civilian safety. The arboreal hero, Kamui Woods, was evacuating people from a nearby apartment building, his wooden limbs stretching and weaving with practiced efficiency. Backdraft was spraying a curtain of water to contain the fires that had erupted from a blasted delivery truck. And in the center of it all, swirling and bubbling in the narrow street, was the villain. Izuku's blood ran cold. It was him. The sludge villain. The one All Might had captured not an hour ago. The one who had nearly suffocated him. He must have escaped when Izuku had clung to All Might's leg. This was his fault. The thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. His eyes, wide and assessing, scanned the scene, his muttering beginning without his consent. They can't get a solid grip on him. His body is fluid, so brute force from Death Arms is ineffective. Kamui Woods is on rescue and is vulnerable to the fires. Backdraft is containing the perimeter, but he can't attack the villain directly without a clear shot at the core. They need someone with the right quirk to either freeze him, or blow him away with concentrated force, or maybe. His muttering died in his throat. Through the churning, putrid green sludge he saw it. A flash of spiky blonde hair. A pair of desperate, crimson eyes, wide with a mixture of rage and genuine, primal fear. Bakugo. The sludge villain was wearing him like a suit, using his explosive quirk to lash out indiscriminately, keeping the heroes at bay. Bakugo was fighting, struggling, but he was being suffocated, his own power turned against him. His explosions were what was causing the fires, the destruction. He was a hostage and a weapon, all at once. Izuku watched, frozen. The heroes were doing what they could, but they were stalled. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. They were following protocol. And while they did, Bakugo was dying. He was looking at the heroes, his eyes pleading for a rescue that wasn't coming fast enough. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was a primal, instinctual scream from the very core of his being. The part of him that All Might had tried to reason with, the part that had filled a dozen notebooks with hero analysis for a future that would never come, the part that saw someone in trouble and knew, with every fiber of its existence, that it had to do something. His legs moved. He shot past the police barricade, a small, green-haired blur of motion. He heard the heroes shout behind him, voices filled with alarm and disbelief. Hey! Kid! Stop! It's too dangerous! He didn't hear them. The world narrowed to a single, desperate objective: buy time. Create an opening. Do anything. His mind, a supercomputer of hero knowledge, was already cycling through options. His eyes. The villain's real body has eyes. If I can hit them, I might be able to make him flinch. He unslung his backpack as he ran, the heavy weight familiar in his hands. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all he had. He swung it with all his might, the yellow canvas a stark contrast to the grimy chaos of the street. Kaken! He screamed, his voice cracking with exertion and terror. The bag sailed through the air and struck the sludge villain square in one of its bulbous, floating eyes. The villain roared in pain and surprise, its fluid form spasming. For a crucial second, its grip on Bakugo's mouth loosened. Bakugo gasped, dragging in a desperate, rattling breath. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? He rasped, his voice a mixture of fury and shock. I don't know. Izuku stammered, his legs still pumping, his hands now clawing uselessly at the sludge encasing his childhood friend. My legs they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. It was the absolute truth. In that moment, watching the life drain from Bakugo's eyes, his own broken dreams had seemed laughably insignificant. In that moment, there was only the suffocating boy and the desperate need to save him. It was the purest, most undiluted expression of heroism he had ever known, and apparently the universe noticed. The sky, which had been a clear twilight, began to change. It started subtly. A strange, metallic tang filled the air, the taste of ozone. The wind picked up, swirling debris and smoke in a vortex around the two boys and the villain. The ambient light of the city seemed to dim, as if a colossal shadow had been cast over them. The heroes stopped shouting. The crowd fell silent. Everyone looked up. Directly above the underpass, the sky was churning. A localized, impossibly dense storm cell was forming out of nowhere, darkening from gray to a bruised, angry purple-black. A low hum vibrated through the air, a sound that felt less heard and more felt, resonating deep in the bone. Izuku felt it first. The hair on his arms and the back of his neck stood on end. A strange energy, like a million tiny needles, danced across his skin. He looked up, his green eyes wide with awe and a dawning terror. The clouds were swirling into a tight funnel, and at its heart, a light began to grow. It wasn't the yellow of a normal electrical storm. It was a brilliant, blinding golden white, purer and more intense than anything he had ever seen. It crackled with an energy that felt ancient and alive. It felt intentional. The sludge villain, distracted by the bizarre meteorological event, momentarily forgot about the boy clawing at him. "What is this? What's happening?" It gurgled, its eyes swiveling towards the sky. Izuku didn't have an answer. All he knew was that the energy in the air was singing a song that resonated with the desperate, heroic scream in his soul. His desire to save, his selfless, reckless charge into danger, it had acted as a tuning fork, and a cosmic orchestra was now responding in kind. He reached out a hand, not towards Bakugo, but towards the impossible storm above, a silent, unknowing plea. And the storm answered. A bolt of pure, incandescent power, a celestial spear of golden-white lightning, descended from the heavens. It did not strike randomly. It moved with impossible precision, aimed directly at the small, quirkless boy in the center of the chaos. Time seemed to warp. For Izuku, the bolt's descent was an eternity. He saw the intricate, fractal patterns of energy branching from the main shaft. He felt the very air split apart to make way for it. There was no fear. There was only a profound, terrifying sense of arrival. A sense of being chosen. Then it struck. There was no sound, at first. Just a flood of white light that consumed everything. The world vanished into a silent, overwhelming sea of energy. Izuku felt a sensation that was not pain, but transformation. It was as if every cell in his body was being simultaneously destroyed and rewritten. He felt the universe pouring into him, a river of cosmic energy carving a new path through his veins. He felt the ghost of 1,000 runners, the echo of infinite momentum, a force that had existed since the first particle moved, and he was now its anchor. Then the sound came. A cosmic roar that was more than thunder. It was the sound of reality itself cracking open. The shockwave that followed was immense, blasting outward from Izuku's position. The sludge villain, caught at point-blank range, was atomized, its fluid body instantly vaporized into a foul-smelling mist. The force of the blast ripped Bakugo free, sending him tumbling across the pavement, coughing and sputtering but alive. The fires were snuffed out. The windows of nearby buildings shattered. The heroes and the crowd were thrown back, shielded from the worst of it by instinct and sheer luck. When the light faded and the roar subsided, the silence that followed was absolute and deafening. In the center of the street, in a newly formed crater of smoking, vitrified asphalt, stood Izuku Midoriya. He was untouched. Not a scorch mark, not a single singed hair. His red shoes were still on his feet, his uniform miraculously intact. But he was different. A faint, golden aura steamed off his body like heat haze. His eyes, wide and staring, were glowing with a soft, internal light. And he was vibrating, his entire form blurring at the edges as if he were a plucked string on some celestial instrument. The world, for him, had slowed to a crawl. He could see Bakugo on the ground, his chest rising and falling in what looked like agonizingly slow motion. He could see the individual shards of glass from a shattered window hanging suspended in the air. He could see the shocked, disbelieving face of Death Arms, his mouth opening to form a word that would take an eternity to complete. He could hear everything. The frantic thumping of Bakugo's heart. The collective gasp of the crowd a block away. The flutter of a pigeon's wings 3 streets over. The frantic whisper of a paramedic on the radio, miles from the scene. The sensory input was a tidal wave, a cacophony of information that his brain was not equipped to process. It was too much. The power thrumming through him, a boundless ocean of kinetic energy, had no regulator. The world, now a static diorama of impossibly detailed moments, pressed in on him. His mind, which had always raced, was now moving at the speed of light, and it was tearing itself apart. A single name surfaced from the storm of data. All Might. He turned his head, a motion that to him felt normal but to the outside world was an instantaneous snap. He saw him. At the edge of the crowd, in his skeletal form, was Toshinori Yagi. His jaw was slack, his eyes wider than Izuku had ever seen them. He wasn't looking at the destruction, or at the freed hostage. He was staring at Izuku, at the impossible boy standing in the center of the storm he had created, and his face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and bewilderment. The connection, the shared gaze, was the last straw. The circuits in Izuku's brain overloaded. The golden aura flickered and died. The vibration ceased. His eyes rolled back into his head, and with a soft sigh, Izuku Midoriya collapsed, a puppet with its strings cut, into the center of the crater that marked the beginning of his new life. Waking up was a slow, gentle process, like surfacing from a deep, dreamless ocean. The first thing Izuku registered was the smell. Antiseptic, clean linen, and the faint, floral scent of a cheap air freshener. A hospital. The second thing was the sound. A steady, impossibly fast beeping. Beep 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 beep. He cracked his eyes open, the fluorescent lights of the ceiling making him wince. To his left was a heart monitor, the green line a frantic, jagged mountain range, the number next to it reading a steady 180 BPM. For a resting heart rate, that was absurd. Yet he felt calm. A strange, low-level hum resonated through his body, a familiar echo of the power that had overwhelmed him. Izuku! Oh, Izuku, you're awake! His mother's voice, thick with tears. Inko Midoriya was by his bedside in an instant, her small hands hovering over him as if she were afraid to touch him. Her face was a wreck of relief, fear, and confusion. Mom? What happened? He asked, his voice raspy. The doctors, they don't know. She sobbed, finally letting her hand rest on his forehead. There was an explosion, a villain, they said you ran in. And then there was a lightning strike? Oh, Izuku, I was so scared. They brought you here, and you were unconscious, but there wasn't a scratch on you. A doctor entered the room, a kind-faced man with tired eyes and a clipboard that he looked at as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Midoriya-kun. Good to see you're awake. I'm Dr. Tsubasa. You gave us all quite a scare. What's wrong with me? Izuku asked, gesturing to the frantic heart monitor. The doctor sighed, adjusting his glasses. That's the million-yen question. Physically? Nothing. You're in perfect health. In fact, you're in impossibly good health. No burns, no signs of electrical trauma, no internal injuries. Your metabolic rate is, for lack of a better term, off the charts. We've had to put you on an 4 drip with 5 times the normal caloric and nutrient content just to keep you stable. But by all accounts you're fine. He paused, tapping his pen on the clipboard. Based on eyewitness accounts from the pro-heroes on the scene and the physical evidence, namely the massive crater of fused asphalt you were found in, we've had to make an assumption. It seems you have a quirk, son. A very powerful one. The word hung in the air, alien and unbelievable. Quirk. But I'm quirkless, Izuku whispered, the ingrained fact of his existence surfacing automatically. The extra joint. We're hypothesizing it was a late-blooming, latent-type quirk. The doctor explained, his tone becoming more clinical. The extreme stress of the villain attack must have triggered its activation, a powerful electrokinetic or high-speed mobility quirk. The ministry will have to run some more tests, but for now, we've registered you as having a newly manifested quirk. Congratulations, I suppose. Congratulations. The word felt hollow. This energy humming in his veins, this memory of a golden storm answering his soul's cry, it didn't feel like a part of his biology. It felt like a gift. Or a visitor. His mother was crying again, but this time, the tears were different. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The dream she had been forced to crush when he was 4 had, by some miracle, been reborn. Oh, Izuku! She wept, hugging him tightly. You have a quirk. You can be a hero, the words he had longed to hear his entire life. And yet all he felt was a profound sense of confusion and a deep, unsettling feeling that everyone, from the doctor to his mother, had gotten it completely and utterly wrong. Later that evening, after his mother had been convinced to go home and rest, he had another visitor. The door to his private room opened silently, and a gaunt, skeletal figure with sharp, angular features and shadowed blue eyes stepped inside. Tashinori Yagi. He closed the door behind him and pulled up a chair, his movements weary. For a long moment, he just sat there, studying Izuku with an intensity that made the boy squirm. "All might," Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. Tashinori let out a long, slow breath. "I was wrong," he said, the words simple, direct, and heavy with meaning. "I stood on that roof and I told you that you couldn't be a hero. I gave you a safe, practical answer. And less than an hour later, you ran into a situation that had stalled multiple pro-heroes, armed with nothing but a school bag and a reckless disregard for your own safety, to save someone's life. You embodied the spirit of heroism more than anyone I have seen in a very long time." Izuku's eyes welled with tears. This was more than he could have ever hoped for. And then, Tashinori trailed off, leaning forward, his voice dropping. "And then that happened. Young Midoriya, I have been a pro-hero for decades. I have fought alongside and against individuals with every quirk imaginable. I have seen powers that can level cities and powers that can rewrite minds. What I saw happen to you today, that was not a quirk." Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, the monitor behind him screeching in protest. "It wasn't?" "No," All Might said, his certainty absolute. "The energy, it felt different. Older. Wilder. A quirk is a biological function, an evolution of the human body. That lightning bolt, it felt like it came from somewhere else entirely. It felt like it chose you." He had felt it too. The sense of arrival. The feeling of being an anchor for something vast and ancient. He wasn't crazy. "I don't know what that power is, my boy," Tashinori continued, his gaze unwavering. "I don't know where it came from or what it's capable of. But I know a heroic spirit when I see one. That power was drawn to you for a reason. And a power like that, untamed and unknown, is dangerous. To you, and to others." He took a breath, and his next words would change the course of Izuku's life far more than the lightning bolt already had. "I am not here to offer you a power. It seems the universe has already taken care of that. I am here to offer you my help. I want to help you understand what this is. To help you control it. To train you, to guide you, so that you can use this incredible gift to become the hero you were always meant to be." The tears that had been welling in Izuku's eyes finally broke free, streaming down his cheeks. It wasn't the offer he had fantasized about. He wasn't being given a quirk. He was being seen. He was being validated. All Might, his idol, the symbol of peace, had looked past the quirkless boy, past the miraculous power, and had seen the hero inside. He wasn't offering to make him a hero. He was offering to help the hero who was already there. "Yes," Izuku choked out, the single word carrying the weight of 14 years of hope, despair, and renewed, brilliant purpose. "Yes, please. More than anything." A small, genuine smile touched Tashinori Yagi's lips. It wasn't the boisterous grin of All Might, but something quieter, more profound. It was the smile of a teacher who had just found his most promising, and most perplexing, student. "Then get some rest, young Midoriya," he said, rising from his chair. "Your life is about to get very, very fast." The familiar comfort of his all-might-themed bedroom had become a high-speed prison. Izuku awoke on his first morning back from the hospital not to the gentle chime of his alarm clock, but to the low, insistent hum that was now the baseline of his existence. It was a vibration deep in his bones, a constant thrum of caged lightning that tingled at the base of his skull and made his teeth ache. It was the speed force, a silent, ever-present passenger in his own body. He sat up, taking a deep, calming breath as All Might had instructed during his final consultation at the hospital. "Slow. Deliberate. Think before you move." He placed one foot on the floor, then the other. So far, so good. He pushed himself up from the bed. The result was instantaneous and catastrophic. His intent was to stand. The energy coiling within him interpreted this as a command to launch. He didn't just stand, he exploded upwards, a human missile of green pajamas and untamed kinetic force. His head connected with the ceiling with a resounding crack that shook the entire room, sending a shower of plaster dust down onto his all-might bedspread. He fell back onto the mattress, his skull ringing, a disoriented groan escaping his lips. The pain was sharp, intense, but already fading, replaced by that incessant, energetic hum. From the hallway, his mother's frantic voice called out. "Izuku? Is everything all right in there?" He tried to answer. "I'm fine, Mom. Just stretched." The words were meant to be calm and reassuring. Instead, they compressed into a single, high-pitched syllable that sounded like a chipmunk being put through a wood chipper. "I'm fine, Mom, just stretched." Silence. Then, a hesitant, worried, "Okay, sweetie. Breakfast is ready when you are." Izuku sighed, rubbing the back of his head where a lump was already receding. This was his new normal. The world operated on a leisurely, infuriatingly slow tempo, while he was a living hummingbird, trapped in a room full of statues. The gentle tick-tock of his alarm clock was a percussive assault, each tick a gunshot in the crushing silence. He could see the individual dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slanting through his window, each one a tiny, drifting planet in its own solar system. When he looked at his own hand, he could almost perceive the microscopic tremor in his muscles, the faint blur at the edges of his fingers that betrayed the storm within. Getting dressed was an exercise in extreme frustration. He tore 2 shirts just trying to pull them over his head. The simple act of buttoning his pants resulted in the button shooting across the room like a bullet, embedding itself in his Silver Age all-might poster. He eventually managed to wrestle his school uniform on, feeling clumsy and oversized, a giant trying to navigate a dollhouse. The true battlefield, however, was the kitchen. Inko Midoriya was a bundle of joyous, nervous energy. Her son, her darling quirkless Izuku, had a quirk. A powerful one. It was a miracle, an answer to a prayer she'd barely dared to whisper for a decade. The reality of that miracle was currently sitting at her table, vibrating with enough energy to make the water in his glass ripple. "Here you go, honey! A nice big breakfast to get you ready for the day," she said, placing a plate in front of him. On it was a standard portion of rice, grilled fish, and tamagoyaki. Izuku's stomach growled, a low, predatory sound that startled them both. He looked down at the plate. It seemed inadequate, insultingly small. Before he could even articulate the thought, his hands were a blur. The chopsticks were a streak of brown, the food vanished, and the plate was clean. It had taken less than a second. He looked up at his mother, blinked, and then said, with perfect, agonizing clarity, "I'm still hungry." Inko stared at the empty plate, then at her son. A slow smile spread across her face. "Of course you are. Power like yours must need a lot of fuel." An hour later, the kitchen looked like it had been hit by a culinary hurricane. Every pot and pan was dirty. The rice cooker was empty. A carton of 12 eggs was gone. Inko was sweating, a smudge of flour on her cheek, but she had never looked happier. Izuku sat before the growing mountain of empty bowls, finally feeling a semblance of fullness. His metabolism, the doctors had explained, was now a raging furnace that needed to be constantly fed. "So," Inko said, wiping her hands on her apron as she sat opposite him, "All Might said he's going to help you with your quirk?" Izuku nodded, trying to do it slowly. "He's going to train me to help me get it under control before the UA entrance exams." Just saying the words, UA entrance exams, sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated hope through him. For the first time, it wasn't a distant, impossible fantasy. It was a tangible goal. A destination. He had the power. Now, he just needed the control. That control was a long, long way off. The rest of his day was a minefield of minor disasters. He spoke too quickly for his teachers to understand, receiving concerned looks and a recommendation to see the school nurse. He snapped 3 pencils in half just by gripping them too tightly. In the hallway, he tried to step aside for someone and ended up 30 feet down the corridor, leaving behind a very confused and slightly windswept student. He was an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of normal life. The one place he found a strange sort of solace was in his notebooks. His mind, which had always raced with analysis and speculation, now had the physical speed to match. That evening, he sat at his desk, and for the first time, his hand could keep up with his thoughts. The pen wasn't a tool, it was a direct extension of his brain. He filled an entire notebook in a single hour. It wasn't just hero analysis anymore. It was physics. He scribbled down complex equations for kinetic energy, friction, and velocity, concepts he'd only vaguely understood in class but now saw with a startling, intuitive clarity. He drew diagrams of his own musculature, theorizing how his cells were processing the energy. He broke down the chemical composition of the air, calculating the heat that would be generated by moving through it at supersonic speeds. It was as if a cosmic textbook had been downloaded directly into his brain, and he was simply the stenographer. He was beginning to understand that the lightning hadn't just changed his body, it had rewired his mind. But understanding the theory was a far cry from mastering the application. For that, he needed his new, improbable mentor. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was less a park and more a monument to societal neglect. For years, it had been an illegal dumping ground, the once pristine sand buried under mountains of rusted appliances, broken furniture, and generations of forgotten trash. The sea breeze carried the stench of decay and salt. It was here, amidst the wreckage, that Izuku Midoriya's formal training began. All Might, in his towering, muscular form, stood with his hands on his hips, a grin plastered on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Behold, young Midoriya! This is your training ground." Izuku, wearing a simple tracksuit, looked at the mountains of garbage. Why here, All Might?" All Might deflated with a hiss of steam, shrinking down into his skeletal form. He coughed, a speck of blood landing on the back of his hand. "2 reasons, kid. First, it's secluded. Given that you currently move with the grace of a startled cat in a room full of rocking chairs, we need a place where you won't accidentally demolish a city block. Second," he gestured to the trash with a sweep of his bony arm, "this place is a disgrace. A symbol of people forgetting what it means to care for their community. Cleaning it up was always a personal project of mine. A way to do some good without throwing a single punch. The goal was different now. The original plan, had All Might found a quirkless successor before this cosmic intervention, was to have them clean the beach to build up their body. For Izuku, the goal wasn't strength. It was stillness. Your problem, young Midoriya," Tashinori said, his tone serious, "is that you have an ocean of power inside you, but you're trying to hold it in a teacup. You're fighting it. Resisting it. You need to learn to flow with it. To ground yourself in the storm." And so, Phase 1 began, grounding. Tashinori had him sit cross-legged on a relatively clean patch of sand, facing the ocean. "Close your eyes. Breathe. I want you to stop thinking about moving fast. Stop thinking about anything. Just feel that energy inside you. Don't fight it. Acknowledge it. Let it exist." It sounded simple. It was the hardest thing Izuku had ever done. The moment he closed his eyes, his accelerated perception took over. He heard every grain of sand shifted by the wind, every cry of every distant seagull, the rhythmic crash of the waves becoming a deafening, chaotic roar. The energy inside him churned, begging to be released. His legs started jittering. His fingers drummed against his knees. "Stop struggling!" Tashinori's voice cut through the noise, sounding slow and distorted, like a record playing at the wrong speed. "You are the anchor, my boy, not the sail. The energy is part of you now. Accept it. Find its center." For days this was their routine. Izuku would try to meditate, and he would fail. He'd get frustrated, leap to his feet, and accidentally sprint half a mile down the beach before he could stop, kicking up a massive plume of sand. Tashinori remained patient, offering quiet guidance, forcing him back to the sand again and again. The breakthrough came during the second week. Izuku was on the verge of giving up, his frustration a physical pressure in his chest. He was a speedster who couldn't stand still, a hero who couldn't control his own body. He was useless. "Deku." "No," a voice in his head said. It was All Might's voice from the hospital. The hero who was already there. He took a breath. This time, instead of trying to silence the energy, he listened to it. He let his consciousness sink into the hum, following the currents of lightning that flowed through his veins. He imagined it not as a chaotic storm, but as a vast, powerful river. And he wasn't trying to dam it up anymore. He was just sitting on the riverbank, watching it flow, and for the first time, the world outside slowed down. Or rather, he slowed down to match it. The roar of the waves softened into a gentle, rhythmic shush. He could hear Tashinori's breathing, steady and even. He opened his eyes. The world looked normal. The sun wasn't a blinding strobe light. The sand wasn't a swirling vortex. He saw a single wave crest in the distance, hang for a perfect, crystalline moment, and then collapse onto the shore. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. A tear rolled down his cheek. He could hear himself speak a single word, perfectly paced. Wow! Tashinori smiled, a genuine, proud smile. Welcome back to the world, young Midoriya. Now the real work begins. Phase 2 was application. Now that he could find stillness, he had to learn to command motion. Their first drill was painfully simple. Tashinori drew a line in the sand 50 yards away. Run to that line, he instructed. And stop. Exactly on the line, Izuku grinned. This was what he was made for. He focused, let the river of energy surge, and took off. The world dissolved into a blur of color. He felt the wind shear past him, the sand crunching under his feet for a fraction of a second. He saw the line approaching and prepared to stop. He overshot it by 200 yards, finally coming to a halt when he hydroplaned across the surf and face-planted into the wet sand. He sat up, sputtering salt water and seaweed. Tashinori's laughter echoed down the beach. Newton is a cruel master, my boy! An object in motion stays in motion. They discovered something new that day. As Izuku trudged back, spitting sand, he noticed the series of scrapes and cuts he'd gotten from skipping across the waves like a stone were gone. The skin was smooth and unbroken. My goodness, Tashinori murmured, examining Izuku's arm. It seems your accelerated metabolism applies to cellular regeneration as well. You heal fast. That will be very useful. It was also a relief. It meant their training could be far more aggressive without risking serious injury. The drills became more complex. Tashinori would toss dozens of pieces of scrap metal into the air, some painted red, some blue, some yellow, and Izuku would have to race out, perceive them all in midair, and collect only the red ones before any of them hit the ground. It was an exercise in controlled perception, forcing his brain to process information at super speed without being overwhelmed. At first, he just grabbed everything in a panic. But slowly, painstakingly, he learned to exist in that moment of frozen time, to think and act with clarity while the world stood still around him. He learned to control his vibrations, a skill he discovered by accident, while trying to stand perfectly still. By focusing the speed force inward instead of outward, he could make his molecules vibrate at an incredible frequency, his form becoming a hazy, indistinct blur. It made Tashinori deeply uneasy. It looks like you're trying to phase out of reality, the hero muttered, watching the vibrating boy. Let's maybe put a pin in that particular skill for now. Months passed in this fashion. The 10-month countdown to the UA exams was their clock. Izuku's control grew with every session. He could now hold a normal conversation. He could walk through his apartment without leaving a trail of destruction. He was still eating enough food to feed a small army, but Inko had adapted with militaristic efficiency. And on the beach, the mountains of trash were slowly, steadily shrinking as Tashinori worked tirelessly in his off hours, a quiet act of civic heroism that inspired Izuku as much as any televised battle. Izuku was learning to be more than just fast. He was learning to be precise. But it was all in a controlled environment. He had yet to face a real test. That test came on a Tuesday. Training had been grueling. Tashinori had been pushing him on his cornering, setting up an obstacle course of junked cars and refrigerators that Izuku had to weave through at top speed. He was getting better, but his turns were still too wide, his momentum a difficult beast to tame. They were packing up for the day, the sun low in the sky, when they heard it. The distant, frantic wail of police sirens, growing steadily closer. Tashinori tensed, his hero instincts kicking in. He glanced at the sky, then back at Izuku. Stay here. This is not your fight. But as the sirens grew louder, they could hear the chaos, the screech of tires, the panicked shouting. The chase was coming right past their beach. Izuku looked at his mentor. He saw the conflict in the man's eyes. He wanted to protect his student, but the hero inside him screamed to act. Before Toshinori could make a decision or bulk up into his all-might form, Izuku had already made his. Just like with the sludge villain, his legs moved on their own. Young Midoriya, wait! But he was already gone. He wasn't a clumsy student anymore. He was a focused instrument of speed. He crested the hill overlooking the coastal road in a heartbeat, the world snapping into the familiar, crystalline stillness of his accelerated perception. The scene was laid out before him like a violent tableau. A beat-up van was swerving wildly, two thugs inside firing wildly out the windows at the three police cars in hot pursuit. A bullet, tumbling end over end in slow motion, was arcing towards the windshield of the lead police car. On the sidewalk 100 yards ahead, a woman pushing a stroller was about to step into the road, her attention on her phone, completely oblivious. There was no time for a plan. There was only time for action. He didn't think. He flowed. His first point of action was the bullet. He ran onto the road, the asphalt ablur beneath his feet, and simply plucked it out of the air. It was warm in his palm. He flicked it harmlessly into the ocean. It had taken him 0.2 seconds. Next, the civilian. He was a whisper of green and wind. He gently pushed the woman and her stroller back onto the safety of the sidewalk, spun the stroller around to face the other way so the child wouldn't be frightened, and was gone before the woman even had time to register the sudden breeze. 0.5 seconds. Now the van. He couldn't just punch it. That would cause a crash, and people could get hurt. The heroes he'd studied, the lessons from All Might, the physics equations in his notebooks, they all coalesced into a single, elegant solution. Precision. Not power. He ran alongside the speeding van, easily keeping pace. The thugs inside were still firing backward, completely unaware of the phantom now running beside them. Left rear tire. He tapped his finger against the valve stem. All the air hissed out in a fraction of a second. The van lurched. Right rear tire. Another tap. More hissing. The van began to fishtail wildly. He ran ahead of it. With a series of movements too fast for any camera to track, he unscrewed the lug nuts on the front right wheel. He pulled them off, caught them, and put them in his pocket. The wheel wobbled precariously. He zipped to the engine, popped the hood, and with the surgical knowledge he'd somehow absorbed, he pulled the spark plug wires and the battery terminal cable. The engine died with a pathetic sputter. The wobbly front wheel finally gave up, rolling off the axle and bouncing into a drainage ditch. The van, now crippled and powerless, ground to a screeching, sparking halt in the middle of the road. The entire process, from the first bullet to the final stop, had taken just under 3 seconds. The two thugs, dazed and confused, stumbled out of the van, guns raised. They were met by a green blur that disarmed them, tied their own belts and shoelaces into inescapable knots around their wrists and ankles, and deposited them neatly on the curb for the bewildered police officers who were only now pulling up. Izuku didn't wait around. He sprinted back to the beach, his heart pounding not from exertion, but from the adrenaline and the sheer, exhilarating thrill of it all. He skidded to a stop next to Toshinori, who was standing there, his jaw hanging open, his skeletal frame looking even more fragile in his shock. You. The car. Toshinori stammered, pointing a trembling finger towards the road where the police were now cautiously approaching the neatly packaged criminals. You dismantled the moving vehicle, with your bare hands. In 3 seconds, Izuku was breathing heavily, a wide, shaky grin on his face. It worked. All Might, it worked. All the training, the focus. I could see everything. I knew just what to do. Toshinori stared at him for a long moment, a complex mixture of pride, awe, and a healthy dose of terror in his eyes. He finally let out a long, shaky breath and a small, wry smile touched his lips. So it did, my boy. So it did. They didn't see the news report until later that night. Izuku was home, devouring a celebratory Katsudon dinner large enough for a family of 6, when his mother called him into the living room. On the screen was a shaky phone camera video from a bystander. It was blurry, chaotic, and almost useless. All it showed was the van screeching to a halt, and then, for a split second, a streak of greenish gold light zipping around the scene. The reporter's voice was filled with excitement. The police are baffled by the sudden and precise disabling of the getaway vehicle. Eyewitnesses report seeing nothing more than a blur of motion. This incident comes on the heels of several other reports in the Musitifa area of a mysterious, high-speed intervener. While no clear images exist, the phenomena has been described as a green flash. Whoever this new vigilante is, they are making a very fast name for themselves. Izuku stared at the screen, his spoon halfway to his mouth. A name. The press had given him a name. The Green Flash. It wasn't Deku. It wasn't Midoriya. It was the name of a hero. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of the television. For the first time, he didn't see a quirkless, useless boy. He saw a boy with a cosmic secret, a boy who could outrun a bullet and save a life before anyone knew he was there. He saw a boy on the cusp of his dream. He saw the Green Flash. And he knew, with a certainty that hummed through his very soul, that this was only the beginning. Thousands of miles from the trash-strewn shores of Dagoba Beach, in a city that hummed with a different kind of energy, Barry Allen was, as usual, late. The rain fell in relentless, silvery sheets, plastering his brown hair to his forehead as he dashed across the slick asphalt of the central city street. He clutched a cardboard tray holding 2 rapidly cooling cups of coffee, his worn leather satchel banging against his hip with every stride. Yellow police tape, already sagging under the weight of the rain, cordoned off a dingy alleyway between a pawn shop and a laundromat. "Alan! You're a forensic scientist, not a suspect. Get over here!" The voice, a familiar, gravelly bark, belonged to Detective Joe West. He stood just inside the tape, his trench coat collar turned up against the downpour, a look of paternal exasperation etched onto his face. Barry offered a sheepish, apologetic smile as he ducked under the tape, nearly fumbling the coffee. "Sorry, Joe. My alarm clock. It's a conspiracy, I swear," Barry mumbled, handing a cup to the detective. Joe took it, his gaze softening slightly as he took a sip. You and time have a complicated relationship, Barry. One of these days, you're gonna be late to your own funeral." He gestured with his head towards the alley. "What do you make of this mess?" The crime scene was grimly standard. A man in a waterlogged business suit lay sprawled on the grimy pavement, his vacant eyes staring up at the perpetually gray sky. The official cause of death would be a single, precise gunshot wound to the chest. But Barry's eyes, trained to see the details others missed, weren't on the body. They were on the brick wall behind it. He crouched down, his fingers hovering over a strange, crystalline residue that spiderwebbed out from a cluster of small impact craters. "This isn't from a standard firearm, Joe. The spalling pattern on the brick is too tight, and this residue, it's some kind of supercooled polymer. Almost like the projectiles were flash frozen." "Metahuman," Joe sighed, the word tasting like old coffee and paperwork. "Another freak with a fancy new power looking to make a name for himself. We're thinking it's the new guy calling himself Captain Cold." Barry nodded, his mind already racing. He pulled a sampling kit from his satchel, his movements becoming precise and economical. Here, in the world of evidence and empirical data, he was no longer the late, clumsy Barry Allen. He was a maestro in his element. "His cold gun isn't a quirk. It's technology. Advanced cryogenics. If I can get this sample back to the lab, I can probably determine the coolant's unique isotopic signature. We could use it to track the energy source." "Do what you do best, Bar," Joe said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Just try to get the report on my desk before next Christmas." Back in his lab at the Central City Police Department, the world outside faded away. This was his sanctuary, a meticulously organized chaos of beakers, chromatographs, and humming computer servers. The rain streaked down the large window that overlooked the city, a percussive rhythm that helped him think. For hours he was lost in his work, analyzing the sample from the crime scene, cross-referencing energy signatures from other metahuman encounters, and building a profile on this new, technologically powered villain. Barry had always been fascinated by the impossible. It was a fascination born from tragedy. He was 11 years old when he'd woken to the sound of crashing furniture and his mother's screams. He'd raced downstairs to see a whirlwind of red and yellow lightning, a maelstrom of impossible energy, with a man's face visible in the eye of the storm, and in the center of it all, his mother, suspended for a moment before she collapsed. His father, Henry Allen, was convicted of her murder, his frantic story of a man in the lightning dismissed as the ravings of a grieving, violent husband. But Barry had seen it too. He knew the truth. That night had set the course for his life. He dedicated himself to science, to the study of forensics, driven by a desperate need to prove the impossible was real, to find the man who had shattered his world. It was why he'd become obsessed with metahumans and quirks, even though Central City's metapopulation was a pale shadow of the powered societies in places like Japan. He was looking for answers, for a single piece of evidence that would prove he wasn't crazy. He was in the middle of calibrating his mass spectrometer when the first alarm went off. It wasn't the standard CCPD alert. It was a high-pitched, insistent electronic shriek from a machine in the corner of his lab, a piece of custom-built equipment that had earned him more than a few eye rolls from his colleagues. He called it the chronotin resonance spectrometer. It was a passion project, a device he'd cobbled together from decommissioned particle accelerator parts and his own proprietary algorithms, designed to detect exotic energy particles, the kind of energy that shouldn't exist. The kind of energy he'd seen in his living room all those years ago. For 3 years, the machine had done nothing but hum quietly, a testament to his seemingly fruitless obsession. Until now. He rushed over to the console, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. The screen, normally displaying a flat, green line, was a tidal wave of data, a spike of energy so massive, so pure, it was literally off the charts. His program was struggling to even quantify it. "Whoa!" he breathed, his fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to stabilize the readings. He rerouted the data through 3 different analytical filters, each one designed to break down a specific type of energy signature. The results that came back made the hair on his arms stand up. Negative quark factor particulates," he muttered, reading the output aloud. 0 gamma radiation. No signs of transdimensional shearing. What is this? Quark-based energy, like all biological systems, was messy. It had byproducts, waste particles, a chaotic, organic signature that Barry could identify in his sleep. This was different. This was a perfect, foundational energy. It wasn't like a chaotic orchestra of biological instruments. It was a single, perfect note ringing out across the cosmos, clean and impossibly powerful. It was the kind of energy that could, theoretically, bend the laws of physics itself. It could make the impossible, possible. His hands trembled as he initiated the triangulation protocol. The signal was strong, but it was distant. The program cross-referenced atmospheric data, satellite relays, and global energy grids. After a moment that felt like an eternity, a location resolved on the world map displayed on his main monitor. A single red dot, pulsing like a heartbeat. Mizudafu, Japan. His mind raced, making connections at a speed that was almost unnatural. Japan. The global epicenter of the quirk phenomenon. But this energy wasn't a quirk. It was something else. An anomaly. He pulled up global news feeds and geological survey archives for the exact time of the energy spike, 1732 Japan Standard Time. The reports were minor, easily dismissed by the casual observer. A localized, freak, lightning storm that appeared and dissipated within minutes. It was mentioned in the same breath as a dramatic villain takedown in the city's commercial district. A sludge villain, holding a student hostage. An event that had been resolved, according to official reports, by the sudden, late-in-life manifestation of the hostage-taker's other victim's quirk. A boy named Izuka Midoriya. Barry stared at the screen, a cold dread and a wild, exhilarating hope warring in his chest. A freak lightning storm. An impossible energy spike that defied all known science. It was too much to be a coincidence. For the next 10 months, Barry Allen was a man possessed. By day, he was a model forensic scientist. He helped Joe and the CCPD close the Captain Cold case, his analysis of the cryo-residue leading them directly to the disgruntled ex-Stag Industries physicist, Leonard Snart. He processed evidence, testified in court, and did his job with his usual quiet brilliance. But by night, he lived in his lab. The walls became a collage of maps, satellite images of Muzutafu, and complex, scrawled equations. He slept on a cot in the corner, subsisting on stale coffee and the thrill of the chase. He had sunk every spare dollar he had into upgrading the spectrometer, refining its sensors to listen for even the faintest echo of that incredible energy signature. He found it, too. Smaller bursts, more controlled, almost always centered around a specific, unassuming stretch of coastline, Dagoba Municipal Beach. And with each burst, he cross-referenced Japanese news sites and hero forums. Whispers began to surface online. Sightings of a new vigilante in Muzutafu. A blur of motion, a green and gold streak that solved problems before most heroes even arrived on the scene. They were calling him the Green Flash. The name sent a shiver down his spine. A flash. Like the lightning in his living room. It was all connected. He knew it in his bones. He just had to prove it. The problem was, no one would listen. He brought his preliminary findings to Captain David Singh, the sharp, no-nonsense head of the CCPD's crime lab. Singh's office was a small, orderly space that felt a world away from the controlled chaos of Barry's lab. "Let me get this straight, Alan," Singh said, leaning back in his chair, his expression a perfect mixture of disbelief and irritation. He steepled his fingers, looking at Barry over the top of them. "You want me to authorize departmental resources so you can investigate a weather balloon? In Japan? It's not a weather balloon, Captain," Barry insisted, trying to keep his voice steady, to project a confidence he didn't feel. He gestured to the tablet in his hands, displaying the energy readings. "This signature is unlike anything ever recorded. It is not a quirk. It is not a weapon. It is a fundamental force that we have no explanation for. And it's centered on a person. A new vigilante. This could be a paradigm shift in our understanding of meta-abilities." Singh pinched the bridge of his nose, a long, weary sigh escaping his lips. "Alan, I value your work. You're the best CSI I've got. But this is your mother's case all over again. You're chasing shadows. You're seeing lightning men in every anomaly. We have real problems here, in the city. Cases that need to be solved. I need your head here, not in the clouds on the other side of the planet. But this could help us solve cases here," Barry pressed, his voice rising with passion. "If we can understand this energy, who knows what the applications could be? It could change everything, or it could be a wild goose chase that wastes time and taxpayer money," Singh countered flatly. "I can't approve this. Not without something more tangible." "I'm sorry, Barry. The answer is no. Now I have a preliminary report on the Trickster case that is 2 days late. Get on it." Dismissed and dejected, Barry walked back to his lab. He knew Singh was just being practical. To anyone else, his theory sounded like science fiction. But Barry had the data. The energy didn't lie. He slumped into his chair, staring at the map of Muzutafu. He was at a dead end. He had the science, but he needed a man on the ground, someone who could get him the information he couldn't access from halfway around the world. An idea began to form. A long shot, but the only shot he had. He had a contact of sorts. A few years ago, he'd attended an international symposium on metahuman forensics. There, he'd met a detective from the Japanese National Police Agency. A man with a quiet intensity, a sharp mind, and a very interesting quirk. A man who, unlike Singh, might just be willing to entertain the impossible. He dug through his old files until he found the contact information. He initiated a secure, encrypted video call. After a few rings, a face appeared on the screen. It was a man with dark, tired eyes, short black hair, and an eternally serious expression, wearing a simple suit and tie. He was sitting in what looked like a Spartan office. "Alan-san," the man said, his voice a calm, even baritone. "It has been some time. I trust you are well, Detective Sakachi," Barry said, a wave of relief washing over him. "I am. Thank you for taking my call. I know this is out of the blue, but I have a situation here, something I think might fall under your jurisdiction. Or at least, your area of interest." Detective Naomasa Tsukachi was known for 2 things, his impeccable arrest record and his quirk, human lie detector. He couldn't read minds, but he knew, with absolute certainty, when someone was telling the truth. It was a quirk that made him an exceptional detective, but also a very weary man. He had spent his career listening to the most convincing lies, able to see the truth hiding behind them. He listened patiently as Barry, speaking quickly and passionately, laid out his findings. He explained the chronoton resonance spectrometer. He showed Tsukachi the data from the massive energy spike 10 months ago, and the subsequent, smaller readings. He connected them to the freak weather and the emergence of the green flash. Tsukachi's expression remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. And I know it sounds crazy, Barry finished, his breath catching in his throat. I know it does. But every piece of data I have points to the same conclusion. Something happened in your city 10 months ago, something not of this world. And I believe it's connected to this new vigilante. There was a long silence. Tsukachi stared at the screen, his gaze seeming to bore right through Barry. Barry felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He had laid all his cards on the table. Now, it was up to the detective. Finally, Tsukachi spoke. The incident you are referring to, the one with the sludge villain. The official file is unusual. Barry leaned closer to the screen. Unusual how? The boy at the center of it, Midoriya Izuku. He was registered as quirkless his entire life, Tsukachi said, his voice low. Then, in a moment of extreme duress, he manifests a power of incredible magnitude, one that vaporizes a villain and leaves a 10-foot crater in the street, yet leaves him completely unharmed. The doctors called it a late-blooming quirk activation. It is a plausible, if rare, explanation. He paused. It is also the one that requires the least amount of paperwork. Barry's heart skipped a beat. Quirkless. So the official story doesn't sit right with you either. Good police work involves acknowledging when the pieces do not fit, Tsukachi stated simply. And your theory, Alan-san, according to my quirk, you are being completely truthful. You genuinely believe every word you are saying. It is the truth, Barry insisted. You believe it to be, Tsukachi corrected gently. There is a difference. However, your data, combined with the irregularities in the Midoriya case and the subsequent sightings of the green flash, it presents a compelling case for further investigation. Barry felt a surge of triumph so powerful it almost made him dizzy. So you'll help me? You'll look into it? I will look into the matter, yes, Tsukachi confirmed. The emergence of a powerful, unregistered vigilante is a matter of public safety. I have a consultant I work with on sensitive cases involving new quirks. The number one hero, All Might. He has taken a particular interest in this phenomenon as well. Barry's eyes widened. All Might. Even in America, All Might was a legend. The symbol of peace. If he was involved, then this was even bigger than Barry had imagined. Send me all of your data, Alan-san, Tsukachi instructed. Every reading, every equation, every theory. I will cross-reference it with our own intelligence on the green flash. We will share our findings, unofficially, of course. Of course, Barry agreed immediately. Thank you, detective. You have no idea what this means to me. I am simply a police officer following a lead, Tsukachi said, a flicker of something almost like curiosity in his eyes. Let us see where it takes us. The call ended. Barry leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face for the first time in months. He wasn't alone in this anymore. He had a partner, an ally on the other side of the world. He felt like he was on the cusp of a discovery that would change history. He turned back to his monitors, his fingers flying across the keyboards as he compiled and encrypted all his research to send to Japan. He pulled up a satellite map, zooming in on the city of Muzurifu. It was no longer just a red dot on a map. It was a place of impossible energy, of freak lightning, and of a mysterious boy who could move like a flash of green light. A connection had been forged, an invisible line drawn across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, tethering a forensic scientist in Central City to a fledgling hero in Japan. Both of them were chasing the impossible. And both of them were about to get drawn into a storm far bigger than they could ever imagine. The green flash, Barry whispered to the empty lab, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Who are you? The air outside the gates of Yue High School was electric, humming with a tension that had nothing to do with Izuku's internal speed-force resonance. It was the collective energy of thousands of hopeful teenagers, each one a bundle of nerves and ambitious dreams, all gathered at the foot of their Olympus. The school itself was a monument to heroism, its iconic H-shaped main building piercing the crisp morning sky, a symbol of everything Izuku had ever yearned for. 10 months. 10 months of grueling, mind-bending training. 10 months of meditating on a junkyard beach, of outrunning his own shadow, of consuming enough calories to bankrupt a small nation. 10 months that had transformed him from a clumsy, vibrating mess into something else. He wasn't a master of his powers, not by a long shot, but he was no longer their victim. He was a pilot, learning the intricacies of a cosmic engine he was still struggling to comprehend. He took a deep breath, consciously slowing his heart rate, forcing the world to remain at its normal, pedestrian pace. He could feel the speed force singing in his veins, a low thrum of anticipation that mirrored his own. He was ready. A rough shoulder check nearly sent him sprawling. "Out of my way, Deku!" The voice was a familiar, angry growl. Katsuki Bakugo strode past him, his hands jammed in his pockets, his crimson eyes shooting daggers of pure, undiluted contempt. The 10 months had not mellowed Bakugo in the slightest. If anything, Izuku's miraculous and unexplained quirk manifestation had only served to pour gasoline on the bonfire of his rival's fury. To Bakugo, it was an unforgivable betrayal. The useless, quirkless Deku, the pebble on the side of his path to greatness, had somehow stumbled into an incredible power, and it made no sense. It was a glitch in the natural order of things, and Bakugo hated it. "Keikakken! Good luck in the exam!" Izuku managed to stammer out, his old habits dying hard. Bakugo didn't even turn around. "Don't talk to me," he snarled over his shoulder. "You're just another extra with a flashy new trick. Stay out of my way." Izuku watched him go, a familiar pang of hurt quickly superseded by a new, quiet determination. He wasn't the same Deku who would have wilted under that glare. He had stood in the eye of a cosmic storm. He had been trained by the symbol of peace. He deserved to be here. He straightened his shoulders and walked through the gates. The written portion of the exam was a blur, but a controlled one. Izuku's accelerated mind devoured the questions. English, mathematics, history, it was all just data, and his brain was now a supercomputer designed to process it. He finished the 3-hour exam in 20 minutes, his pen a controlled streak of motion across the page. He spent the remaining time meticulously double-checking his answers, forcing himself to read at a human pace, lest the friction of his thoughts burn a hole through the paper. It was in the cavernous auditorium, waiting for the practical exam briefing, that the true weight of the day settled on him. He sat surrounded by a sea of other students, a vibrant tapestry of mutations and potential energies. A girl with pink skin and horns. A boy with bird-like features. A stoic-looking teenager with engines strapped to his calves. Every single one of them had lived their entire lives with a quirk. They understood their powers, had grown up with them as a part of their very identity. Izuku was an imposter, a recent immigrant to this world of power, armed with something that wasn't even technically a quirk. Present Mick's booming voice snapped him out of his reverie. The hero's explanation of the practical exam was a high-decibel whirlwind of information. Foes' cityscapes. Robotic villains worth 1, 2, or 3 points depending on their difficulty. The goal was simple: smash as many robots as you can in the allotted time. It was a test designed to showcase flashy, powerful, destructive quirks. The kind of quirks Bakugo excelled at. The kind of quirk Izuku, for all his incredible speed, did not possess. He couldn't punch a robot into scrap metal. His physiology, while incredibly resilient and fast-healing, was still fundamentally human. Hitting a multi-ton robot at high speed would be like throwing a water balloon at a brick wall. He'd break every bone in his body, and while he'd probably heal, it wasn't exactly a winning strategy. His strategy had to be different. It had to be based on his unique advantages: perception, precision, and problem-solving at the speed of thought. His notebooks, filled with years of analysis, were more of a weapon for him today than brute force could ever be. All Might's words from their final training session echoed in his mind. "You are not a sledgehammer, young Midoriya. You are a scalpel. Don't try to win their game." Make them play yours. As President Mike finished his presentation, a tall, well-built boy with dark blue hair and glasses stood up, his arm chopping the air with rigid precision. Excuse me, sir. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed, yet you have only mentioned 3. If this is a misprint, it is a disgrace for a prestigious institution such as UA. He then swiveled, pointing a finger directly at Izuku. And you, with the curly hair. You have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. Izuku shrank in his seat, his face burning with embarrassment. Before he could stammer out an apology, President Mike intervened. All right, examinee 7111. Thanks for the call-out. The 4th villain type is a 0-pointer. It's an arena trap, a gimmick. Worth 0 points. Think of it like a thwomp from Super Mario. My advice? Avoid it and run. The boy sat down, appeased. Izuku, however, filed the information away. Arena trap. A massive obstacle with no reward for engagement. Designed to test risk assessment and situational awareness, it was another piece of the puzzle. They were herded into buses and driven to their designated battle centers. Izuku found himself standing before the towering gates of Battle Center B, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The city within was a sprawling, silent labyrinth of concrete and glass, waiting to be filled with chaos. He spotted the kind-faced, brown-haired girl from the auditorium nearby, taking deep, calming breaths. He wanted to wish her luck, but the memory of being called out by the boy with the glasses made him hesitate. He didn't want to bother anyone else. And begin! President Mick's voice screamed from unseen speakers. The massive gates slid open. While the other examinees stood in confused silence for a moment, Izuku was already moving. What are you waiting for? The test has started. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Go! 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 The others jolted into action, surging past him into the foe's city. Izuku took one last, deep breath, grounding himself. The river of the speed force churned within him. Scalpel. Not a sledgehammer. He leaned forward and pushed off. The world dissolved. To the other examinees, he was a blink-and-you'll-miss-it phenomenon. A whisper of green wind that was there one moment, and gone the next. But in Izuku's perception, time crawled to a near standstill. The city became a static 3D map, a complex problem waiting to be solved. He could see everything, the layout of the streets, the placement of the robots, the panicked, chaotic movements of his fellow competitors. He bypassed the initial scrum at the entrance, where Bakugo was already carving a path of explosive destruction, his face a mask of manic joy. Izuku ran deeper, into the heart of the city where the robots were still inactive, still waiting for their programming to engage. He saw his first target, a one-pointer, a sleek, green machine on a single wheel, its optical sensor glowing red. He didn't charge it head-on. He ran a circle around it in less than a second, his accelerated mind analyzing its design, identifying its weaknesses. Exposed wiring at the base of the main sensor, unprotected hydraulic lines in the axle joint. Power capacitor located behind a flimsy access panel on its back. He chose the access panel. He zipped behind the robot, his fingers finding the seam in the metal. He didn't need brute strength. He just needed speed. He vibrated his fingertips at a high frequency, the metal of the panel groaning in protest as the microscopic vibrations broke its magnetic locks. He tore the panel off, reached inside, and with a practiced, precise tug, ripped out a handful of wires and a small cylindrical capacitor. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It coasted to a silent, powerless halt. 1 point. A grin split Izuku's face. It worked. He didn't need to destroy them. He just had to disable them. The next 10 minutes were a masterclass in high-speed, non-lethal efficiency. He became a ghost in the machine of the exam. He would appear, dismantle, and disappear before the other examinees even realized the target was there. A group of 3 two-pointers cornered a student with a tail quirk. Before they could fire their pincer arms, Izuku was a blur among them. He unscrewed the critical bolts holding their arms to their chassis, leaving them flailing uselessly. He rerouted their own power cables, short-circuiting their internal systems with a shower of harmless sparks. 3 robots, disabled in 2 seconds. The tailed student just stared in bewildered gratitude at the spot where the green streak had been. 7 points. He saw a three-pointer, a heavily armored, tank-like machine, bearing down on another group. While a student with a hardening quirk tried to trade blows with it, Izuku ran up the side of a building, launched himself into the air, and landed on the robot's back. He located the main CPU access port, vibrated his hand until it phased through the thick armor plating, and crushed the central processing unit in his grip. The massive machine seized up and collapsed, its lights dying. 10 points. He was a phantom, a whisper. He wasn't racking up the kind of visually impressive, explosive score that the judges were likely used to seeing. He was clean, surgical, and almost invisible. He rescued other students from imminent danger 5 times, not by destroying the threat, but by creating openings for them or by dismantling the robot's weapon systems before they could fire. He tripped charging machines, tied their legs together with torn-off cabling, and jammed their weapon ports with scrap metal. His point total climbed steadily. 15. 22. 31. 38. It was a respectable score, probably enough to pass, but not enough to stand out in a crowd of powerhouses. But Izuku wasn't just focused on points. He was focused on the whole board. And his enhanced senses felt a change in the environment. A deep, seismic tremor that vibrated through the soles of his shoes. The zero-pointer. It emerged from behind a skyscraper, its sheer scale breathtaking and terrifying. It was a mechanical titan, a behemoth of green metal and blinking red lights that dwarfed the surrounding buildings. Its massive arms could crush entire city blocks. As it moved, the ground shook, and buildings crumbled in its wake. President Mick's advice echoed in his ears: avoid it and run, and everyone did. A wave of panic swept through the examinees. They turned and fled, a mad scramble to escape the path of the lumbering, pointless obstacle. It was the logical, sensible thing to do, but Izuku, as he turned to run, heard something else. A small, terrified whimper. He stopped, his head snapping back towards the giant robot. There, trapped under a large slab of fallen concrete from a damaged building, was the kind-faced girl with the brown hair. The zero-pointer's colossal foot was rising, preparing to take another step that would bring it down directly on top of her. Something inside Izuku's chest went quiet. The frantic calculations, the point scoring, the strategic analysis, it all vanished. He was back at the underpass, watching Bakugo suffocate. He was a boy whose legs moved on their own. What does a hero do? The question wasn't a thought. It was a fundamental truth. A hero saves people. No matter the cost. No matter the odds. Points be damned. He turned, and for the first time in the exam, he wasn't a scalpel. He was a lightning bolt. He pushed the speed force, harder than he ever had in training. He poured every ounce of the cosmic river into a single, desperate sprint. The world didn't just slow down, it froze solid. The dust particles from the crumbling buildings hung in the air like a frozen nebula. The panicked faces of the fleeing students were masks of stone. The zero-pointer was a silent, unmoving god of steel. In this frozen world, only he could move. He wasn't thinking about a strategy. He was simply acting on a dozen different plans at once, his mind processing every possibility in the microsecond it took him to reach the girl. Plan A: lift the debris. He tried, his hands finding purchase on the concrete slab. He pushed, heaved, but it was too heavy. His speed gave him momentum, but not superhuman strength. The debris didn't budge. Failure. Plan B: evacuate the girl. He could phase his arms through the concrete, grab her, and pull her out. But he never tried phasing with another person. What if he rematerialized her inside the rock? The risk was too great. Failure. The zero-pointer's foot, in his perception, was now beginning its agonizingly slow descent. He had seconds in his time frame, which meant milliseconds in the real world. He looked around, his eyes darting across the frozen cityscape, his brain a whirlwind of frantic problem-solving. He saw the other students. He saw their quirks. The boy with the engines on his legs, a girl with long, vine-like hair. A boy creating shields of glass. They were all running away. They couldn't help. Then he saw it. A pile of discarded robot parts from a three-pointer he'd dismantled earlier. Long, sturdy struts of metal. A plan, insane and desperate, clicked into place. He became a green blur, a living thread weaving through the tapestry of the frozen battlefield. First, he raced back to the trapped girl. "Don't worry. I'm going to get you out," he said, his voice sounding slow and warped even to himself. Next, he was at the pile of scrap. He grabbed 3 of the longest, thickest metal struts. He then ran back and forth between the debris and a nearby sturdy building, a distance of about 50 yards. He ran the distance 10 times in the span of a heartbeat, gathering speed, gathering momentum, pouring more and more of the speed force into his body. A crackle of golden lightning began to arc around him, a visible manifestation of the power he was building. He jammed the first strut into the ground at an angle, pointing towards the descending robot foot. He raced back, grabbed the second, and wedged it between the first strut and the concrete slab trapping the girl, creating a crude, makeshift lever. He needed a fulcrum. He raced down the street, found a wrecked, cube-shaped one-pointer, and with a scream of effort fueled by pure kinetic energy, he pushed it, sliding it across the pavement until it was positioned perfectly under his lever. The zero-pointer's foot was now terrifyingly close. He had one last chance. He took the third metal strut, ran to the top of the tallest nearby building, and with a final, desperate burst of speed, he ran down its sheer face, using his velocity to stay plastered to the wall. He launched himself off the bottom floor, the strut held forward like a juicer's lance. He was no longer just a boy running, he was a projectile. A living bullet with a single, impossible purpose. He struck the far end of his lever with all the accumulated momentum of his run. Crack boom. The sound was a sonic boom and a thunderclap rolled into one. The impact transferred a colossal amount of kinetic energy through the lever. The strut bent, groaned, and then held. The massive slab of concrete trapping the girl's leg was lifted a few crucial inches into the air. It was enough. Izuku vibrated his body, phasing through the lever system he had just created, and appeared next to the girl. He grabbed her, pulled her free, and deposited her a safe 20 yards away in the same instant. As he let her go, the makeshift lever finally shattered under the strain. The concrete slab crashed back down, and the zero-pointer's foot completed its descent, crushing the spot where they had been with a cataclysmic, earth-shaking impact. "Time's up!" the siren blared, signaling the end of the exam. The remaining robots powered down. Silence descended upon the ruined cityscape, broken only by the panting of the exhausted examinees. Izuku stood there, his body screaming in protest. He hadn't broken any bones, but he had pushed himself to the absolute limit. The speed force was a roaring inferno inside him, and his muscles felt like they had been shredded. He looked at the girl, who was staring at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe, confusion, and gratitude. You saved me," she said, her voice trembling. Izuku just nodded, too drained to speak. He looked at his hands. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He hadn't destroyed the zero-pointer. He had used his speed, his mind, and the environment around him to solve an impossible problem. He had saved someone. He had been a hero. But as he looked at the scoreboard in his mind, 38 villain points, a cold wave of dread washed over him. He hadn't gained a single point from his actions. In a test designed to quantify heroic potential through destruction, he had spent the final, crucial moments on a zero-point objective. He had saved the girl, but he had likely failed the exam. A week later, a letter from Ye arrived. Izuku sat at his desk, the envelope feeling as heavy as a gravestone in his trembling hands. This was it. The moment of truth. His mother hovered anxiously in the doorway, her face pale. He opened it. A small metal disc fell out onto his desk and sputtered to life, projecting a hologram into the air. It was All Might, in his booming, muscular form. "I am here! As a hologram!" the projection announced. Izuku flinched. All Might explained that he would be a teacher at UA, then got straight to the point. "Young Midoriya, regarding the entrance exam, you passed the written portion with flying colors. However, in the practical exam, you scored a mere 38 villain points." Izuku's heart sank into his stomach. It was over. All that training, all that hope, for nothing. "Ordinarily," All Might continued, his voice softening slightly, "that score, while passable, would not be enough to place you highly. But that was not the only metric for this test. The hologram changed, displaying a grainy video feed from the exam. It showed the girl with brown hair, Ochako Uraraka. All Might identified her, talking to Present Mike after the exam had finished. That boy with the curly green hair, her voice said from the recording. He saved me. And I saw him helping other people, too. Is there any way I could give him some of my points? He deserves to be here. He was a true hero. The hologram shifted back to All Might. A hero course is not just about defeating villains. A true hero saves others, even at great personal cost. And for that reason, there was a secret component to the exam, he pointed dramatically. Rescue points. A panel of judges awards them for acts of true heroism. Ochako Uraraka, 77 villain points, 45 rescue points. Tenya Ida, 90 villain points, 50 rescue points. The screen flashed again, showing Izuku's name. Izuku Midoriya, 38 villain points. All Might paused for dramatic effect. And the highest rescue points score in the history of UA High School. 120 rescue points. For a grand total of 158, Izuku stared, his mind refusing to process the numbers. The video showed his actions from a dozen different camera angles, dismantling robots to save others, creating openings, and finally, his insane, brilliant, last-ditch rescue of Uraraka. It hadn't been a waste. They had seen it. They had understood. You did not win their game, young Midoriya. All Might's voice boomed, a proud smile on his face. You made them play yours. You showed that power is nothing without a heroic heart to guide it. Welcome, Izuku Midoriya. This is your hero academia. Tears streamed freely down Izuku's face as his mother sobbed with joy behind him. He had done it. He was going to UA. Later that evening, as the celebration died down, Izuku sat on the now clean sands of Dagoba Beach, staring at the ocean. Toshinori sat beside him, in his skeletal form, a thermos of tea in his hands. I am proud of you, my boy, Toshinori said quietly. Truly. You used your head and your heart. That is the mark of a great hero. Izuku nodded, a small smile on his face. Thank you, All Might. For everything. Toshinori was silent for a long moment before he spoke again, his voice taking on a new gravity. Your performance in the exam has solidified something I have been thinking about for a long time. Your power, this speed force. It is incredible for mobility, for rescue, for precision. But it lacks an anchor. A focal point for overwhelming power when you need it. When a villain is too strong, too durable, and the only answer is to hit them hard enough to make them stop. He turned to face Izuku, his sunken eyes burning with an intense light. I have seen your spirit. I have seen your intelligence. I have seen your heroism. There is no one more worthy. He plucked a hair from his head and held it out to the boy. I am offering you my quirk. My power, one for all. It is a sacred torch, passed down from generation to generation of heroes. A stockpiling quirk that will grant you unbelievable strength. It will be the anchor for your storm. The sledgehammer to your scalpel. Izuku stared at the offered hair, his mind reeling. One for all. All Might's power. He was being offered the single greatest power in the world, on top of the cosmic gift he had already received. He thought of the zero-pointer. He thought of villains he wouldn't be able to dismantle. He thought of the times when speed alone wouldn't be enough to save everyone. He thought of All Might's trust in him. A power that will give you the strength to truly save people, Toshinori said, his voice filled with conviction. It will amplify the strange energy you already wield. Together. I can only imagine what you will become, overwhelmed, humbled, and filled with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of destiny. Izuku reached out a trembling hand. His dream hadn't just come true, it had grown into something grander, something more impossible than he had ever dared to imagine. Eat this, All Might commanded. Izuku Midoriya took the hair. And with it, he accepted his future. 10 months before Izuku Midoriya would prove himself at the UA entrance exam, in a sterile, subterranean laboratory hidden beneath a nondescript warehouse in the industrial sector of Muzutafu. Dr. Arata Kageyama was cursing the genetic lottery. The lab was his sanctuary and his prison, A web of humming servers, gleaming chrome machinery, and holographic displays that painted the windowless concrete walls in shifting hues of blue and green. In the center of the room, suspended in a crackling magnetic field, was his life's work, the Kageyama manifold. It was a monstrous, beautiful thing, a series of concentric rings forged from exotic alloys, all aimed at a single, shimmering point in space. It was a scalpel designed to dissect reality itself. Kageyama, a tall, gaunt man with sharp features and raven-black hair swept back from a high forehead, watched the readouts on his main console, his lips pressed into a thin, dismissive line. Outside, barely audible through the layers of soundproofed earth and concrete, the distant sounds of sirens and a minor villain attack polluted the airwaves. He filtered them out as background noise, the insignificant squabbles of a society built on a flawed premise. Quirks. He loathed the very concept. He saw them not as the next step in human evolution, but as a biological plague, a chaotic, random distribution of power that rewarded genetic luck over intellectual merit. Idiots who could breathe fire were lauded as heroes, while men like him, men who could bend the laws of physics to their will through sheer force of intellect, were forced to operate in the shadows. He wasn't just a researcher, he was a philosopher of power. And he believed, with every fiber of his arrogant, brilliant being, that true power should be seized, not inherited. His research was a direct challenge to the established order. The Hero Public Safety Commission, before they blacklisted him and revoked his funding, believed quirks were a biological phenomenon, a simple matter of the quirk gene. Kageyama knew better. The energy signatures were too diverse, too reality-defying to be simple biology. He theorized they were leaks, cracks in the fabric of their dimension, allowing echoes of a higher, more potent reality, a source dimension of pure power, to seep through and attach themselves to human DNA. He wasn't just studying quirks, he was trying to find their source code. The Kageyama manifold wasn't designed to study the ripples, it was designed to punch a hole in reality and tap the ocean itself. And that day, for the first time, the ocean was beginning to notice him. A soft, insistent alarm chimed on his console. He glanced down, expecting another minor energy fluctuation from his machine. Instead, he saw a reading that made his breath catch in his throat. "Impossible," he whispered, his long fingers dancing across the keyboard. A massive, multi-spectrum energy event was building less than a mile from his location. It wasn't the messy, chaotic signature of a quirk. This was something else. It was pure, coherent, and unbelievably powerful. It was the exact theoretical signature he had been hunting for his entire career. His manifold, which had been gently probing the dimensional walls, was now screaming, its sensors overwhelmed by the tidal wave of exotic energy that was gathering just overhead. He brought up the external audio-visual feeds. The image was grainy, showing a narrow commercial street, smoke, fire, and the swirling, disgusting form of some minor sludge villain. In the center of it all was a boy. A plain-looking, green-haired child, clawing desperately at the villain, who had taken another boy, a blonde with an explosive temper, hostage. Kageyama scoffed. This was the nexus of this incredible event. This pathetic, heroic pantomime? It had to be a coincidence. The energy was likely a precursor to his own experiment finally reaching critical mass. He turned his attention back to the manifold, frantically trying to adjust its resonance frequency to capture, to siphon, some of this wild energy. "Come on, you beautiful beast," he murmured to the machine. "Don't fail me now. Show them all what real power looks like." The sky on his monitor, directly above the two boys, began to darken. A storm was brewing, a storm that defied all meteorological explanation. The energy readings on his console shot past every safety parameter he had programmed. Red lights flashed across his lab, claxons blaring a frantic, useless warning. This was it. The moment of discovery. The dimensional barrier was weakening, but the energy wasn't flowing towards his machine. His manifold wasn't drawing it in. It was the opposite. The energy was gathering, focusing, with a terrifying, sentient-like intent. It was choosing a target, and its target was the boy. "No!" Kageyama breathed, his face a mask of disbelief and outrage. "No, it's mine! I summoned it! I'm the one who knocked on the door!" A bolt of pure, gold and white lightning descended from the heavens on his screen. It struck the green-haired boy. The resulting energy discharge was biblical. A wave of pure power, a silent, expanding sphere of reality-warping force, washed over the city. In his lab, Kageyama wasn't just watching the event. He was at its epicenter. His manifold, tuned to the exact frequency of this dimensional breach, acted not as a receiver, but as an amplifier for the shockwave. The world went white. And then, it turned to screaming, blood-red agony. If the energy that struck Izuku Midoriya was a divine gift, a harmonious integration of cosmic power, what struck Arata Kageyama was the shrapnel from the gate being kicked open. It was the backlash. The wound. It was the raw, negative space left behind by the positive charge, a parasitic echo born of violence and envy. A torrent of black and crimson lightning erupted from the Kageyama manifold. It was not the clean, pure energy that had chosen Izuku. This was a twisted, corrupted version, spitting and hissing like a cornered animal. It tore through the lab, ripping metal from the walls, shattering holographic screens, and vaporizing computer terminals. Kageyama had no time to scream. The main bolt, a spear of solidified rage, struck him directly in the chest. Pain was the first sensation. A pain so absolute and all-consuming it transcended the physical. He felt his DNA being violently unwound and rewritten with a broken, alien script. He felt every nerve ending set ablaze, not with heat, but with a horrifying, kinetic coldness. It was the feeling of being accelerated and decayed at the same time. His consciousness was dragged through the bleeding wound in reality. He did not see a golden sea of infinite motion. He saw a void, a dark, hungry abyss, where time was broken and the laws of physics were a dying scream. He felt the presence of something ancient and malevolent, a predator that fed on motion, a force that was the antithesis of the one that had just anointed a hero. It was the end of the race, the finish line that was also a grave. It was the friction that would bleed the universe dry, and it latched onto him. It saw his ambition, his envy, his bottomless hunger for power, and it found a kindred spirit. It poured into him, not as a gift, but as an infection, a parasite finding the perfect host. The last thing Arata Kageyama knew before the darkness took him was the sound of his own lab, his life's work, collapsing into a heap of twisted, smoking ruin around him. He awoke to the drip, drip, drip of water from a broken pipe, a sound that seemed to take an eternity between each drop. His body was a symphony of agony. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming, and looked at his hands. They were trembling, blurred at the edges, and streaked with crimson energy that crackled and died like faulty wiring. The lab was gone. He was in a tomb of his own creation. But he was alive. More than alive. He felt charged. A furious, predatory energy coiled in his gut, a dark mirror to the Izuku Midoriya would soon feel. He staggered to his feet, his movements clumsy. He needed to know what had happened. He spotted one of his hardened data drives half buried in the rubble, its casing miraculously intact. He reached for it. His arm shot out like a piston, a blur of motion that defied his conscious control. His fingers, moving faster than sound, slammed into the drive. Instead of grasping it, they shattered the reinforced titanium casing, the drive inside crumbling to dust. Kageyama stared at the metallic powder on his fingertips, his mind, for the first time, moving as fast as his body. The world around him seemed to be trapped in amber. The dripping water was a suspended, quivering jewel. He could see the stress fractures forming in the concrete ceiling above him, a slow, geological process that would take hours to result in a collapse. He could see everything. And it was all so slow. A grim, terrifying smile stretched his lips. "Incredible," he whispered, his own voice sounding like a drawn-out moan in the frozen soundscape. It took him weeks to gain a semblance of control. Weeks of living in the ruins of his ambition, scavenging for food and equipment. He was a quick study. He was a genius, after all. He learned to slow himself down, to interact with the world without destroying everything he touched. He also learned the nature of his new power. It was not like the clean, golden energy he had seen on his monitors. His was a hungry, destructive force. When he moved, he left a trail of red-black lightning in his wake. Objects he brushed past at speed would age and decay. A metal pipe would rust in an instant. A wooden crate would splinter and rot. His speed didn't just move through the world, it consumed it. It was a physical manifestation of entropy. He managed to salvage enough components to build a crude terminal, and with it, he hacked into the city's data networks. He pulled up the file on the sludge villain incident. He read the official reports, the witness statements, the medical evaluation of one Izuka Midoriya. Quirkless. A late manifestation, Kageyama laughed. A raw, bitter sound that echoed through the ruins. They were fools. He cross-referenced the energy signature from his damaged sensors with news reports. And there it was, the emergence of the green flash. A vigilante whose speed was described as a clean, golden-green blur. A hero. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture of cosmic injustice. The power he had sought his entire life, the power he had baited with his own genius, had been given to a worthless, quirkless child by sheer, dumb luck. The boy had been in the right place at the right time, his pathetic, suicidal heroism acting as a lightning rod. But Kageyama's scientific mind saw it differently. The boy wasn't the owner of the power. He was an accidental vessel. An imperfect container for a limitless energy source. The lightning had needed an anchor in their dimension, and it had latched onto the first available conduit. The boy was the prime conduit, and the power Kageyama now wielded? It was the consequence. The negative. The equal and opposite reaction. It was intrinsically linked to the boy's. He could feel it, a faint thrum on the edge of his perception, a connection across the city. His power yearned to connect with its other half. To consume it. To become whole. His ambition, which had once been focused on a theoretical source, now had a tangible, living target. It was never meant for you, boy. Kageyama snarled to the empty darkness. It was meant for me. You are simply keeping it warm. I will take it back. I will take it all, but to do that, he needed to rebuild. He needed resources, advanced technology, and a way to stabilize the volatile, parasitic energy that threatened to consume him from the inside out. He needed to test his limits. And for that, he needed subjects. He found them in a grimy pachinko parlor in the city's underbelly, a place that reeked of stale smoke and desperation. They were a pair of low-level thugs, brothers named Kenji and Taku, known for their muscle and their utter lack of brains. They were complaining about a botched robbery, about how if they'd just been a little faster, they could have gotten away. Kageyama, a shadowy figure in a hooded coat, approached their table. Speed is a commodity I can provide, he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. Kenji, the larger of the two, scoffed. Beat it, creep. We're not in the mood for riddles. Kageyama didn't move. He simply raised a hand. A flicker of red lightning danced between his fingertips. The air grew cold. The lights above their table flickered and died. The thug's bravado evaporated, replaced by a primal fear. What do you want? Taku stammered. A simple transaction, Kageyama said, his eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. I require a list of components from a Ketsubutsu Advanced Research Facility. You will acquire them for me. In return, I will give you the speed you crave. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved. He was a phantom, a whisper of decaying wind. He placed a hand on each of their chests. The thugs cried out as a jolt of ice-cold energy shot through them. It wasn't a gift, it was an invasion. Kageyama pushed a sliver of his negative speed force into them, a cancerous seed of corrupted motion. They convulsed on the floor, their bodies vibrating violently, red lightning arcing from their skin. Their screams were high and thin. It was a painful, agonizing process. When it was over, they staggered to their feet, their eyes wide and bloodshot. The world had slowed down for them, too, but it was a nauseating, distorted vision. What did you do to us? Kenji gasped. I gave you a taste of what you wanted, Kageyama said, stepping back into the shadows. He handed them a datapad with a list of materials. You will feel your bodies breaking down. The energy I have given you is unstable. It is consuming you. Complete your task, and I will give you more to stabilize it. Fail me, and you will burn out from the inside, aging 1,000 years in a single second. He gave them a final, chilling smile. Now run.
The Ketsubutsu facility was one of the most secure private labs in the prefecture. The heist should have been impossible. But that night, the security staff was met with a nightmare. Two figures, moving as terrifying red blurs, tore through their defenses. They weren't precise or clean like the Green Flash. They were agents of chaos. They smashed through walls, their speed a blunt instrument. Security guards who got too close aged before their very eyes, their hair turning gray, their skin wrinkling as the brothers' entropic aura washed over them. They were fast, but they were clumsy. Their movements were jerky, uncontrolled. Their bodies couldn't handle the strain of the negative energy. They left a trail of rust, decay, and panicked, prematurely aged guards in their wake. They snatched the specified components, a quantum-entangled processor, several vials of stabilized exotic matter, a prototype graviton lens, and were gone in under 2 minutes. From a rooftop miles away, Arita Kageyama watched the news feeds, a satisfied expression on his face. The data was invaluable. He could see how the negative energy affected untrained bodies. He could analyze their speed, their energy expenditure, the rate of their cellular decay. They were his lab rats, disposable tools to further his own understanding. He met them in a designated sewer tunnel, the reek of the place doing little to mask the smell of ozone and decay coming off the two brothers. They dumped the case of components at his feet, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. "We did it!" Kenji panted, his face pale and haggard. He looked like he had aged 10 years since the previous night. "Now give us the rest." The cure. Kageyama inspected the components, his smile widening. Everything was there. "A cure?" he mused, looking up at them as if they were curious insects. "There is no cure. I am the source. You are merely temporary vessels." The brothers' faces fell, replaced by a dawning horror, then rage. "You tricked us!" Taku screamed, lunging forward, his hand a red blur aimed at Kageyama's throat. Kageyama didn't flinch. He simply raised his own hand. He didn't need to be faster. He was the master of this power. He reached out and tapped into the energy he had loaned Taku. And he pulled. Taku screamed, a soul-shattering shriek of agony. The red lightning that covered his body flared violently, and then rushed back into Kageyama's outstretched hand. Taku's body began to break down at an impossible rate. His skin withered, his hair turned white and fell out, his muscles atrophied. He collapsed into a cloud of dust and brittle bones before he even hit the ground, his final scream echoing in the tunnel. Kenji stared in mute, paralyzed terror at the spot where his brother had been. "His speed has returned to me," Kageyama said calmly, a fresh surge of power coursing through him. He had learned he could reclaim the energy, stronger than before. He could steal kinetic energy. It was a monumental discovery. He turned his cold gaze on Kenji. "And now, I will take yours." Kenji finally broke, turning to flee. He was fast, a desperate red streak in the darkness of the sewer. But he was running on borrowed time, on borrowed speed. Kageyama was a patient predator. He let him run for a few seconds before he moved, a blur of pure black and crimson. He appeared in front of Kenji, his hand outstretched. "The race is over," he said, and closed his fist. The power was ripped from Kenji, and he too dissolved into nothingness, his stolen speed flowing back to its source. Arita Kageyama stood alone in the silence, the case of advanced technology at his feet. He felt stronger, more in control. His experiment was a complete success. He now had the resources and the data he needed to build his true masterpiece, a machine that would not just siphon the speed force, but would rip it wholesale from its conduit. He picked up the case and began the walk back to his ruined lab, his steps now confident, purposeful. He had a new identity now. Dr. Arita Kageyama was a ghost, a disgraced scientist buried in the rubble of his own lab. In his place was something new. Something fast and terrible. He would be the embodiment of high velocity. The true master of speed. He was Kosoku. And his hunt for the prime conduit was about to begin.